Welcome to Module 2. This module is intended to support FSL educators in maximizing oral communication and interaction through high-yield, low-risk strategies. Within this module, we will explore how to equip language learners to engage in accountable, productive talk in order to build confidence, develop oral proficiency, and understand how French is used to communicate. Our goal is to develop learner confidence, engagement, and proficiency in French using the Common European Framework of Reference, CEFR inspired principles and practices. As such, Module 2 features instructional insights and concrete classroom ready strategies. By explicitly teaching and modeling communication techniques, learners will begin to independently select, use, and apply strategies to communicate in the target language. You will find a glossary of terms for all of the bolded words within this module at the end of the viewer's guide. There are a few key goals for this module. First, we explore high yield, low risk strategies to support purposeful and productive talk with the intent to honor learner variability and enhance learners' speaking productions. Next, we develop an awareness of aspects of culture in diverse French speaking communities. We celebrate the different cultures and linguistic identities of people who speak French in our classrooms, local communities, and around the globe. FSL classrooms must include principles and practices of Universal Design for Learning, UDL, to ensure success for all learners. Within this module, we will discuss how to reduce barriers to learning, build learner confidence, and develop communication competencies. All learners need to feel empowered to take responsibility for their own learning of the French language. And so, we will share anti oppressive, asset based approaches to assessment and evaluation in terms of how to support and promote learner progress. We believe that learning experiences need to be learner centered. Educators must incorporate the lived experiences of learners within individual programming pathways and talk frames. Educators must center learners through inclusive instructional strategies and culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. So, how do we develop a greater receptiveness to the identities and worldviews of other French speakers? The ministry resources pictured on the screen support FSL educators in establishing the conditions for intercultural awareness and understanding to thrive. They also reference CEFR inspired strategies to integrate speaking meaningfully within language programs. As educators set the context for language acquisition, it is important that they plan tasks that allow learners to apply their knowledge and skills in an authentic context. Transforming FSL, for example, reminds educators that vocabulary and language structures must be scaffolded as needed and contextualized to support meaningful communication. Moreover, regular opportunities for teacher to student, and spontaneous interaction are essential in order to build learner competence and confidence. Educators must take this further by honoring each learner's individual identities and providing them with agency and ownership over how they communicate in French. Take a moment to reflect on and assess your current instructional approaches. How can you decenter the educator to allow learners to have agency and ownership over the ways in which they build proficiency in French? How might the ministry resources that you see on the screen help educators position themselves as co learners and encourage authenticity within learner centered models of learning? Deborah Cafiero, a modern languages professor at the University of Vermont, believes that learning another language is necessary and valuable and beautiful because it transforms the individual. In Deborah Cafiero's opinion, youth who learn new ways to communicate develop a greater receptiveness to the identities and worldviews of others, as well as an expanded sense of who they are in connection to their second language identity. In other words, learners collect bits and pieces of language which they can then use to express their identities and communicate meaningfully. Simply put, the ability to speak multiple languages brings an expanded sense of identity and a greater feeling of interconnectedness with the world. Throughout this module, we will celebrate the different cultures and linguistic identities of people who speak French in our classrooms, local communities, and around the globe. We will identify our implicit bias in instructional design and consider how learners can be empowered to take responsibility for their own learning of the French language. According to the Office of Commissions of Official Languages in Ontario, 8 in 10 Canadians agree that more needs to be done so that young people can become proficient speakers of both French and English. Ontario has the largest French speaking minority community in Canada, and 11% of the population can speak both English and French. This number has grown by 7% since 2011. In fact, a study released in 2017 showed that 979,269 Ontarians are currently learning French, 40% of whom are learning to speak within a core French model, whereas 11% are learning to speak within an extended or immersion model. More and more Ontarians are looking to learn French and recognize the importance of becoming proficient speakers in both national languages. FSL educators who adopt an anti racist and anti oppressive stance in their pedagogy hold high expectations for all learners and regard learners with an asset based lens. They believe that all FSL learners can and will learn French. Historically, traditional teaching and learning models espoused a monolingual ideology that valued the standard variety of French to the detriment of dialects, regionalisms, and other varieties spoken outside of Paris. The existence of these binary norms led to the formation of what Philippe Blanchet calls glotophobia, a prejudice that is based on the use of so called standard French and characteristics of speech, including accent and perceived size of vocabulary. Glotophobia generally manifests itself through microaggressions, since the very existence of a standard dialect, e.g., Metropolitan Parisian French, traditionally taught in second language classrooms, implies the existence of a substandard patois. These microaggressions can lead to language insecurity and often have major consequences for learners. For example, undermining their self confidence, sense of legitimacy, and belonging. This feeling of insecurity tends to be linked to a perception that one's accent, choice of words, or even grammar fail to align with standardized language norms, ultimately leading to the fear of being discredited and deprived of one's identity as a member of the French speaking community. As Siham Bouhami and Loïc Bordeaux share in their article entitled Diversity and Decolonization in French Studies, A New Approach to Teaching, quote, we must recognize that the model generally adopted in our teaching has been created for a monolingual, white, middle class student population and fundamentally fails to take account of the multilingual, multicultural, multiracial, and multi-ethnic reality of our communities. By presenting this model as the only possible and desirable one, we are hampering our students' learning capacities and potential, both as speakers of French and as individuals. While there is a place in class for the standard variety of French, students should also learn that they have a choice in the language they produce, as well as in whether to align themselves with standard forms or to subvert linguistic norms. End quote. Simply put, as FSL educators, we must confront stereotypes in our teaching practices. Educators must do away with the stereotyped image of the ideal francophone as a monolingual speaker from metropolitan Paris. In selecting teaching materials, we have the professional obligation to disrupt colonial practices and oppressive stereotypes, and instead design brave and inclusive learning spaces for all learners. To learn more about disrupting linguistic insecurity, visit Building Linguistic Security, Be Brave, Speak French from Canadian Parents for French. Talk is critical to learning. Learners must be given opportunities to contextualize language and engage confidently in oral communication tasks that are authentic and meaningful. Performance tasks must involve learners in a blend of whole class, group, and individual activities so that they may develop the power of listening and discussing ideas with others. Take a moment to reflect on and assess your current instructional approaches. How might we build communicative competencies through accountable talk and the purposeful talk frames you see pictured on the screen? The action oriented approach to language acquisition views communication as a social activity designed to accomplish specific tasks. The CEFR emphasizes active language use, including spoken production and spoken interaction. It recognizes learners as social agents, i.e., active participants in the learning process. At the beginning stages of developing language proficiency, core French learners learn to interact in French to have basic needs met, make introductions, ask and answer simple questions about family, home, neighborhood, school, friends, and interests. These are all topics of immediate personal relevance. Core French learners may be learning to carry out the following acts of communication in French: greeting someone, making introductions, asking and answering simple questions about familiar topics, asking for help, requesting and giving directions, inquiring about procedures to join a club, team, or affinity group. Additional examples are given within Transforming FSL. As learners gain proficiency, the tasks become more complex, and the communication strategies and language required become more linguistically and cognitively challenging. The key is to create opportunities for interaction, to make them authentic, and to ensure that the talk has an explicit purpose that is clear to the learners. A learning culture should move learners from being dependent on the educator to becoming independent learners motivated by the desire for continuous improvement.
The following CEFR wheels were created with the intention to support FSL educators in maximizing purposeful learner-centered interactions. These wheels are organized by CEFR level and then categorized into different activities for your learners. These different categories allow the educator and the class to create the I can or the je peux statements followed by the supporting success criteria. These wheels also provide examples of vocabulary and useful expressions to start discussion and oral production in the classroom. These CEFR wheels were designed for use by both the educator and the learner. For the educators, they can be used to guide the planning and development of tasks to promote oral production in the classroom. These wheels can also be used by the educator for large group instruction for the purpose of warm-up or reviewing vocabulary. Used directly by the learners in small groups, these CEFR wheels would provide choice and continued French-speaking practice for all learners. The sample vocabulary located on each wheel provides a starting point for discussions, and providing different levels of the wheel would allow for differentiation so that you can meet the needs of all of your learners. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. What are some effective ways that the CEFR wheels can be used by the learners in the classroom? How can they be used throughout the school year to enhance speaking production and interaction? Social interactions in the classroom are great ways to engage all of our learners and to put the language into practice. Social interactions can be created by bringing provocations and supplies to create and simulate these social environments within the walls of the classroom. Educators can also build these social interactions and environments by teaching and practicing the essential vocabulary for these social interactions. Using this co-created vocabulary, educators can create sample dialogues that the learners can rely upon and practice. The combination of the vocabulary, as well as the setup of the classroom, can make these social settings as authentic as possible. This setup can include plates, cups, placemats, and napkins, for example. The learners can engage in role play, pretending that they have left the classroom and are serving or ordering food at a restaurant. This same thing can also work for cafes as well as stores, where learners can behave as if they are shopping and model this experience. Small group interactions are a favorite for learners, as they like the independence, the choice, as well as the opportunity for flexible seating. Small group interactions provide multiple opportunities for learners to be able to speak, as well as a comfortable and relaxed environment. When learning a second language, learners are nervous to speak, and many learners find the size of the small group environment comforting. A few examples of small group interactions promoting oral production in the classroom can include playing cards. Playing cards is something learners are familiar with and enjoy. games such as Go Fish or Crazy Eights. And as a group, learners and educators can brainstorm what vocabulary is required to play these games and then can provide the learners with opportunities to play. This play ultimately becomes engaged speaking practice. Learners can also benefit from the use of flashcards. These flashcards can be purchased, created, or even virtual. Learners are quite creative with their flashcards, playing memory, alphabetizing them, and timing each other to accomplish tasks. A great tip for flashcards is also to magnetize them so that the learners can easily manipulate them in a vertical learning space. Toys are also an amazing option for learners to continue their speaking, opportunities for practice, and dialogues. Example of toys can include Lego, blocks, stuffed animals, and doctor kits. Learners love being given the opportunity to bring in their own toys from home and the chance to play with their toys, but this time in French. Large group interactions can be used to stimulate interest, explain concepts, provide core knowledge, and direct learning. Large group interactions can be used in the FSL classroom as part of the daily routine. These large group interactions can range in length of time, depending on the activity, as well as the age, ability, and proficiency level, with the goal of having learners communicate in the target language. Examples of large group interactions can be the greetings and salutations you give to the learners each day, as well as how the class gets started. These routines, which provide structure to the learners, also provide daily repeated practice, allowing learners to become more confident and proficient. Another example of large group interaction that provides opportunities for learners to speak can include asking and answering questions on a survey. These surveys provide learners with the opportunity to ask questions, listen for the answers, and record responses. These quick, frequent dialogues with multiple learners will promote and enhance productive talk in the FSL classroom. Virtual meetings are also a wonderful chance for large group interactions. The virtual meetings could be with a presenter or another classroom of learners. Finally, interactive slide decks are a wonderful chance for learners to review, practice, and see vocabulary words. Presentations can serve as an effective way to promote speaking in the French classroom. In person presentations can be on various topics chosen by the educator and aligned with the curriculum. These in person presentations also develop an awareness of aspects of culture in diverse French speaking communities. Virtual presentations are also an option to promote French speaking in the classroom, as the options of which and what presentations you would like for learners increase. These presenters can be from anywhere in the world. Cultural presentations, whether virtual or in person, could be an option for learners as they celebrate different cultures and linguistic identities of people who speak French in our classroom, local communities, and around the globe. Finally, presentations can also take the form of the learners presenting themselves. Canadian Parents for French lead a wonderful oral speaking festival where different types of presentations are given as options to the learners. There are options for rehearsed and/or spontaneous speech. Instructional strategies are a wide range of techniques that educators can use to help learners become independent and strategic. These techniques are initially taught by the educator, but following multiple opportunities to practice, these techniques become important learning strategies. Learners select the appropriate strategy and effectively implement it to accomplish a task or to meet a goal. The chart on the left includes important strategies to increase oral production from your learners. These strategies should be discussed in the classroom setting as well as practiced on an ongoing basis. Following activities or assessment, educators can discuss which strategies were implemented and how learners can apply others to continue to achieve success and growth. Learners can also do a self assessment of their work and their learning, identifying which strategies they could use the next time. The chart on the right highlights a task for which learners are responsible. For example, I can use simple words to describe something. During an assessment, the educator will be looking at the criteria to see how well the learner can meet the purpose of the task. For example, can the learner talk about day to day activities or say simple sentences? The performance and observation columns of the table allow the educator to record their observations, next steps, and areas where the learner did well. These columns can also be used by the learner as a chance to reflect on their own learning. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. What strategies do you currently use in your classroom to promote speaking?
Assistive technology empowers language learners to demonstrate understanding based on their own variability and preferences. What is necessary for some is undoubtedly good pedagogy for all. Assistive technology reduces power imbalances and increases conversational output. It allows learners to self select tools to match their individual strengths and preferences. For example, à l'écoute with Idelo. Assistive technology provides learners with full access to the learning environment. For example, voice to text and text to speech software. Learners can even leverage digital tools, for example, Google Docs, to transcribe audio when engaging in live storytelling. Language rich instructional strategies, such as the picture word inductive model, or PWIM, introduced by Emily Calhoun in the 1990s, uses pictures to promote language development. Pictures are engaging, thought provoking, and can serve as conversation starters within the classroom. Consider leveraging a set of unlearned posters through the use of the picture word inductive model. Unlearned posters are sets of thought provoking designs that were designed to create positive change in the community. By coupling unlearned posters with the picture word inductive model, you can encourage critical thinking and inspire inclusive conversations about diversity and equity in your FSL classrooms. Begin by mounting a variety of posters around the room. Next, share an example of a poster. Invite learners to share what they see, what they notice, and what they wonder. Use these conversation starters as an instructional strategy by which to identify target vocabulary and build language. As learners share their ideas, educators can write labels in the margins of the image. Using target vocabulary, learners can then share what the posters mean to them, or perhaps they can create their own unlearn inspired posters and speak to the meaning behind their designs. Another idea is to invite learners to create a 4-frame identity poem. An identity poem is a spoken self portrait. Within an identity poem, the poet shares information about their identity. For example, their culture, heritage, ancestry, passions, or goals. Using familiar vocabulary and expressions, students introduce themselves to their peers. Add interest to identity poems by scaffolding the poem according to 4 frames. Invite students to select 4 pictures that hold meaning and share information about themselves in connection to these images. Learners can, of course, use their own images, or they might consider sourcing images from copyright free websites like Unsplash, Pexels, or Pixabay. They can narrate their story using voiceover and add keywords to the images using digital photo editing tools like Canva. Language learners differ markedly in the ways in which they can be engaged or motivated to use the target language, as well as the ways in which they comprehend and process information. It is important that FSL educators recognize that learners have preferences for how they express themselves and that they honor learner variability, providing open ended prompts for learners to interact with one another. This framework is known as Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. UDL improves and optimizes teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. The first principle of UDL reminds educators to provide multiple means of representation in order to build knowledge and comprehension in all learners. Katie Novak, an education consultant and author on inclusive practices, reminds us, quote, "It is not enough to comprehend information if there is no way to express it." End quote. Within this standalone resource called OMLTA, A Guide to the Digital Landscape, you will find UDL-inspired guidelines and tips to make FSL more accessible to all learners. To explore the document, use the tabs on the right to navigate between instructional technologies or listen to the audio prompts to guide your decisions. While universal design for learning strategies can lower barriers and increase access for all learners in your classroom, these tactics can specifically help those learners who may have to surmount cultural and language barriers in particular. In keeping with the need for multiple means of representation, educators need to provide rich verbal and procedural scaffolds to highlight language patterns and build learner fluency. Educators must offer multiple means of action and expression in order for learners to communicate within meaningful contexts. Educators must empower language learners to be confident participants with voice and choice in regards to the conversational opportunities offered in language classrooms. When educators depend exclusively on textbooks and a limited amount of curated resources that are not evaluated for representation, they prevent learners from accessing, filtering, and assessing information from marginalized creators and become the only source of information. Designing with the UDL framework in mind provides access to a variety of information and provides agency and ownership over the learning. The role of the educator shifts from being the gatekeeper of information to providing learners with the ability to form connections as global citizens. Consider leveraging technology to facilitate understanding of different cultures, connect diverse populations, and create opportunities to improve speaking skills. To learn to speak well, learners have to speak often and speak with purpose. Through the use of innovative talk frames such as those pictured on the screen, learning becomes relevant and accessible as learners can connect with information, tools, and or experiences that they deem to be personally meaningful. Virtual reality, or VR, is a groundbreaking new technology designed to raise engagement and increase knowledge retention for learners of all ages. Virtual reality simulates the three-dimensional environment and immerses learners in barrier-free virtual experiences. Learners can explore other parts of the world through virtual field trips, and in so doing, build cultural competence. Learners can even create their own immersive environments using free, open source desktop software and record themselves speaking about points of interest. Headsets aren't even required. If you are intrigued by the benefits of virtual reality, but new to the technology, you might consider asking students to create their own real viewer. Invite students to draw or assemble snapshots of their favorite memories and add them to their very own cardboard reel viewer. Using do it yourself materials such as cardboard, magnets, lenses, and photographs, students can create their very own reel viewers to speak about topics of personal relevance. Alternatively, you can offer physical viewmasters to students in order to replicate the 3D experience and invite students to point out and speak about points of interest. As you can see, bringing virtual reality experiences into the language classroom doesn't have to be scary, and it doesn't have to be costly. If you are looking to dive deeper into the world of virtual reality, affordable options exist, including low priced viewers like Google Cardboard and cost effective equipment that connects to smartphones or standalone headsets. Research shows that the most effective method of learning to speak a new language is a method of total immersion, whereby learners enter into an authentic environment and are immersed fully in the language. No matter how creative and communicative it may be, the traditional language classroom has been unable to fully replicate this experience until now. Green screen technology lets users alter their video background and replace it with their preferred background. To achieve this effect, a solid green screen is placed behind the subject of the video. Once the initial filming is done, special software allows the editor to replace everything that appears green on the video with a still image or another video. This is called Chroma Keying. Learners can create stories using Lego figurines, puppets, Play Doh, and green screen technology. They can create content that speaks to their lived experiences, passions, and interests via stop motion, live motion, or even animation. Learners can introduce themselves or share aspects of their identities via news reports or time lapse videos. Alternatively, learners can simply use the magic of the green screen to visit points of interest elsewhere in the Francophone world and narrate their experiences. With the rise in popularity of podcasts, why not consider integrating podcasts into your FSL courses? There are many advantages to podcasting. Of course, podcasting accentuates the links between oral communication and writing, but podcasting also helps learners to build cultural awareness and develop self confidence. As they listen to proficient speakers communicate in the target language, they build vocabulary. And as they begin to create their own spoken productions, they gain confidence. While learners can add intro and outro music, as well as sound effects to their recordings using a myriad of open source software available online, at its heart, podcasting is about sharing stories on topics of interest and learning how to connect with an audience using nothing more than the spoken word. If you are looking to code to spark conversation, you might consider trying an unplugged coding activity. Create an 8x8 grid out of tape in the classroom. As an example, invite the class to think of their favorite foods. Learners can draw their favorite foods, cut out pictures of their favorite foods, or even create them out of Play Doh. They then place their favorite foods on the 8x8 grid. One partner is the programmer, and the other runs the program. The programmer calls out how to move on the grid. The other person must follow their directions in order to move about the grid and ultimately retrieve and identify different items. Older students who are interested in unplugged coding and concurrently exploring conditionals may be interested in a modified version of Simon Says. To begin, the whole class stands. The leader will say a series of conditional statements. Some may just be if, then, but some may be if, then, else. The class must do their best to follow the instructions. Here's a simple example. The teacher will say, Si vous avez les yeux bruns, levez la main gauche. Sinon, asseyez-vous. In this case, everyone who has brown eyes should have their left hand raised, and everyone else should be seated. Block-based coding software is yet another way to empower programmers to create content that speaks to their lived experiences, passions, and interests. If you are looking for Canadian content, you might consider Lynx. Lynx is a cloud-based coding platform that's designed for youth ages 9 and up. Best of all, Lynx is free for all Canadian educators because it is funded by the Ministry of Education. The platform offers the ability to create text-based code in multiple languages. As Lynx is available in French and supporting resources are available in French, it is possible to invite learners to write commands in French. It is also possible to add French audio clips to your productions. Young people can create games, animations, drawings, digital stories, and much, much more. Apart from the obvious motivational benefits, coding helps language learners to decode language. Educators can use coding experiences to reinforce vocabulary and build connections to schema as language learners acquire new information and gain new experiences. Take a moment to reflect on and assess the talk frames and provocations that you currently use in your language classroom. How can you leverage innovative talk frames to facilitate ongoing and immediate feedback, support learning, and gather evidence of progress in pronunciation and speaking fluency? At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. How do you incorporate the linguistic identities and lived experiences of the learners in your FSL classrooms within programming pathways and talk frames?
The principles of assessing oral language in the FSL classroom include promoting the alignment of teaching with the CEFR. The CEFR defines levels of language proficiency, which help both educators and learners identify where they are in their learning and measure their development over time. In a CEFR inspired classroom, the educator would provide tasks that can be easily implemented, along with engaging in communicative activities aligned with the CEFR. This purposeful talk can stem from showing an object to the class and then discussing the object. The purposeful talk can be greetings, salutations, asking how someone is doing, asking about preferences, discussing current events, sharing personal stories and recounts of a weekend or a vacation. Students can work in small groups, partners, or in a large group. Within these tasks, educators are also required to embed the assessment as, of, and for learning to accommodate the needs of all the learners. Finally, when assessing oral language, educators implement a variety of learning strategies. These strategies empower their language learners to engage in language tasks and activities that have real life purpose. The assessment of oral language skills is an ongoing process. It begins with the design and creation of the task and then its implementation. Following the task, the educator should consider planning for future learning. This chart provides a process to follow to assess the language competencies of your learners. The process of assessment begins with the design of the task. The design of the task should be created by the educator, but also with the help and feedback from the learners themselves. The process continues with the observation of the learners during the preparation for the task. Educators can see the strengths of their learners and the next steps learners may need to take in their learning. Following the observation is the performance component of assessment. This is where the learners have the opportunity to perform what they can do and show how well they can do it. Following the performance, the assessment of oral language skills then continues with recording. Educators are encouraged to record observations, insights from conversations between learners and educators, and evidence from learners' performance. The last two steps of the assessment process include reflection and sharing. Reflection is an activity for both the educator and the learner. The educator reflects on the performances of the learners, how well they did, and areas in which they can improve. Based on these reflections, educators can plan for future learning. Learners are encouraged to reflect on what they did well and also what they need to work on based on the criteria of the task. These reflections and thoughts can then be applied to future tasks. When choosing a task to assess, always start with the why. Why are we having learners take on this task? When learners know what they are working towards achieving, then they can speak with intentionality. In the form of a can do statement, learners are aware of the purpose of the activity and can answer the question, what is the task? The can do statement also describes what the learner will do during the task to demonstrate their abilities. The next step in deciding how the task will be undertaken. This depends on the task itself. For example, if the purpose of the task is to give information about themselves, learners can answer questions in simulated role play situations and practice the necessary vocabulary to accomplish these tasks. The final step in assessment is asking the question, how did it go? The assessment of how a task went is based on the criteria that was established by the learners and the educator together prior to the assessment. The educator observes how well the learner implemented the outlined criteria. For example, the learner has enough vocabulary to communicate and can use short phrases and words. These observations should be tracked by the educator, discussed, and then accompanied by feedback. As FSL educators, our goal is to have our students speak and communicate in French. This can be achieved by allowing our learners to engage in oral communication tasks that are authentic and meaningful. We should not feel, however, that it is necessary to assess every piece of work. Once a task has been designed and communicated, the preparation phase begins. This preparation can take the form of communicating the purpose of the task, practicing strategies that learners can use during the task, discussing the criteria of the task, and focusing on the language needed to accomplish the task. These preparations can also take the form of modeling and practicing so that the learners know what the task is and how it can be done. The preparation for a task can also be monitoring the learners to gauge whether or not further support is needed. All of this preparation does not need to be assessed, but rather observed, recorded, and used to further prepare learners to achieve success. Following the preparation portion of the task, the next step for the learners is doing the task. Doing the task can include making adaptations to accommodate all of the learners and also a time where educators can make observation, gain insights into strengths and weaknesses of the learners, and record notes for assessment purposes. Educators can also give learners time to complete self assessment and share feedback with them on their performance. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. Number 1, what are some examples of activities that you use in your classroom to practice oral speaking? Number 2, what are some examples of activities that you use in your classroom to assess oral speaking?
Your voice and feedback support the development of future professional learning series. Please take a moment to complete the following survey with your team. Should you have any questions about this module, please send an email to omlta@omlta.org. These modules were created under the leadership of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association. The OMLTA is a nonprofit professional association that has been supporting French as a second language and international languages teachers of all programs and grade levels since 1886. Today, it continues to be the leader in professional learning and advocacy, inspiring and connecting Ontario's French and international languages educators. These modules were designed to support FSL teacher retention and recruitment by deepening the understanding of the directions, principles, and content of the Ontario curriculum policy documents for all 3 of the province's FSL programs: Core French, Extended French, and French Immersion. The OMLTA would like to thank the Ministry of Education for its financial support in developing these modules. Special thanks is also extended to the educators who contributed their expertise and experience to the development of these modules.